What experience fundamentally changed how you see the world? When I was 23, I was basically a walking disaster with a high-limit credit card. I'd landed a spot on a specialized high-voltage line crew out in the Pacific Northwest. The money was insane for someone my age, and it went straight to my head. I spent my weekends blowing my paycheck on bottle service, getting into pointless fights at dive bars, and showing up to the Monday morning meeting with a smirk like I owned the entire utility company. I was loud, I was arrogant, and I had zero respect for the hierarchy of the trade. I thought because I was fast and didn't mind the heights, I was indispensable. The rest of my crew consisted of three guys who were the polar opposites of me. There was Elias, our foreman, who was 52 and had hands that looked like they were made of literal leather. Then there was Marcus and Big Mike, both in their early 40s. These guys were quiet professionals. They didn't talk about their weekends. They talked about their kids' soccer games, upcoming mortgage refinances, and the aches in their joints. We spent about 3 hours a day together in a heavy-duty crew cab, driving to remote substations. For months, I filled that silence with my own ego, bragging about how much I drank or how I'd mouthed off to a foreman from another department. The turning point happened in the summer of 2011. We were working on a tensioning project that was already behind schedule and over budget. I decided to take a massive shortcut on a safety harness check and a grounding procedure because I wanted to finish early and hit a concert back in the city. I didn't just put myself at risk. I created a situation where if a line had stayed hot, the guy working the bucket below me would have been fried. I got caught by a site inspector, and we all got sent home early while the company decided whether or not to pull our contract. I climbed into the back of the truck, still acting like a clown. I was complaining about the inspector being a tight ass and making jokes about how we all needed the afternoon off anyway. I was midway through a story about some girl I was seeing when Elias slammed his hand against the steering wheel so hard I thought the plastic would crack. He didn't pull over. He just kept driving, staring straight ahead at the road, and told me to shut my mouth before he did it for me. The silence that followed was heavy. I started to fire back with some smart-ass comment, but Marcus, who sat next to me, turned his whole body to face me. He didn't look angry. He looked disgusted. He told me, "You think this is a game, Tyler? You think we're out here for the view?" He started listing things off. He talked about his daughter's tuition. He talked about Mike's wife, who was going through a health scare and needed the union insurance. He told me that every time I pulled a stunt like that, I wasn't just being a rebel. I was actively taking food out of their kids' mouths. Then Elias joined in from the driver's seat. His voice was low and shaking. He said, "I've spent 30 years building a reputation so that when I sign my name to a job, people know it's done right. You're a guest in this trade, and right now, you're a shitty guest. If we lose this contract because you're too lazy to check a ground, I'm not just losing a job. I'm losing the house I've spent 20 years paying for. I'm losing the respect of men who actually know what it means to be a provider." For the next 90 minutes, they took turns systematically dismantling the version of myself I was so proud of. They didn't call me names. They just explained the reality of being a man with responsibilities. They talked about the weight of a life. They explained that my freedom to be a screw-up ended the second it touched their ability to take care of their families. By the time we hit the outskirts of the city, I wasn't the hotshot anymore. I felt like a small, selfish child who had been allowed to sit at the adults' table and had spent the whole time throwing food. I didn't sleep that night. I realized that my untouchable attitude was just a mask for the fact that I didn't actually care about anyone but myself. I showed up the next morning 2 hours early. I didn't say a word. I just grabbed the equipment and started the prep work. It took me about 6 months of silence and hard, disciplined work before Elias would even look me in the eye again. That was nearly 15 years ago. I'm in my late 30s now, and I've got a crew of my own. When I see a kid walk onto the site with that same "I'm the main character" energy, I don't get mad. I just think about that truck ride. I realize then that a career isn't about the paycheck. It's about the trust you build with the people standing next to you. I owe those three men everything, though I doubt they even remember that specific drive. To them, it was just a Tuesday. To me, it was the day I actually grew up. Realizing that a person's public persona can be a complete fabrication is a pivotal moment in understanding the complexity of human motivation. I was 11 and in 6th grade when everything that felt like stability went sideways. My mom, Janelle, was in and out of the house for stretches that could be days or weeks. Sometimes she'd show up hammered or get taken away by the cops at night. Dad had left years earlier. Between arrests and disappearances, we bounced between couches, slept in the car, and a couple of times we were truly homeless for a week. Utilities got cut. There were mornings with nothing to eat and no clean clothes. My little brother Mateo started bolting out the front door at odd hours. I was the only one who ever chased him down. Most mornings I forced myself up, shoved whatever clothes I could find on two people, wrestled Mateo out of bed, and walked to school exhausted and late. School used to be the only place that made sense. I was in the gifted class, I took pride in my homework, and doing well felt like a lifeline. That year, though, I was a mess. I cried all the time. It wasn't theatrical. It was the only thing that came out when the world tilted. I would try to hold it together in the hallway and then break down in a bathroom stall before class. Even a teacher's glance would set it off. Ms. Klein taught math, and somehow she decided I was the easiest target. The first time she yelled at me in front of the class, she called me lazy for being late. I explained, barely coherent, that my mom had been arrested again and my brother wouldn't get up. She rolled her eyes, raised her voice, and made an example of me. After that, it wasn't just discipline. If I sniffled, she'd snap, "Save it for home," and let the room laugh. When kids snickered, she smiled at them like she'd done them a favor. Once, when I tried to hand in late work because we'd had no lights the night before, she crumpled it and read my answers aloud, making fun of my spelling. I'd always believed doing the right thing, studying, being quiet, being respectful, would buy me protection. I wanted to impress teachers. I wanted at least one adult to notice and help. Ms. Klein crushed that by telling everyone I was dramatic and weak. She didn't correct me or reach out. She weaponized my shame. She mocked my tears in class. When classmates went after me, she joined in or ignored it. She took a kid who was barely holding it together and made the rest of the room complicit. My grades slid. I went from straight A's to C's and D's in a semester. The gifted program pushed me toward a few extra assignments I couldn't manage because I was sleepwalking through life outside school. I remember sitting at my desk with math problems filling the page while my brain replayed the night before. The cold, the hunger, and the teacher standing over me, smirking. I barely passed the year. I don't think I learned much algebra that year. I learned that showing vulnerability makes you a target and that people meant to protect you can instead hurt you worse. After that year, things didn't magically fix. My mom got better and worse in cycles. Mateo was pulled into social services for a while. I graduated high school later than planned, but the damage from Ms. Klein stuck. I stopped volunteering answers in class. I stopped raising my hand in meetings. I started assuming that if I showed any emotion, confusion, sadness, asking for help, I'd be punished for it or laughed at. Trust was harder to build. Teachers who later tried to be kind felt suspicious to me, like they were hiding a punchline. I'm 39 now. The practical parts of my life are okay. I have a job, a small apartment, and my brother and I are on better terms. But that year left a scar that didn't heal neatly. I still flinch when authority figures shout. I still second-guess whether I deserve accommodation when I'm struggling. Sometimes at night I replay moments and hear her laugh. Stylized, sharp, like a soundtrack that won't stop. I've worked through therapy, built friendships, learned boundaries, and I'm not the same kid anymore. But there's a line that still trembles when someone dismisses me in public. I don't tell the story to indict every teacher, most are decent, but to make it clear that cruelty disguised as firmness can change a life. Ms. Klein didn't just grade my late homework. She sank her teeth into whatever confidence I had left. If you ever see a kid who's always late or crying or messy, don't assume they're just a behavior problem. Sometimes the smallest kindness, one private question, one teacher who doesn't make them the joke of the room, can stop the downward spiral. I wish someone had offered that to me when I was 11. It is heartbreaking to see how a single authority figure's cruelty can leave a lifelong scar on a child who was already doing their best to survive. I was 22, working the graveyard shift at a massive 24-hour laundromat on the east side. It was about 1:12 a.m. on a Friday, quiet except for the hum of machines and one other person, an older man in a rumpled navy coat that looked like it hadn't seen daylight in days. He wasn't sorting clothes or loading a machine. He just sat on a folding table, watching a dryer tumble some shirts, hands curled around a paper cup of coffee gone cold. I was thinking about closing off the back row so I could finally get some sleep, so I went over to tell him he couldn't camp out there. Before I could, he looked up and said, "Do you ever think about how much is happening when you're asleep? How lives keep moving and you won't ever know most of it?" He told me his name was Arthur, and that his wife had died in her sleep 2 nights earlier. The apartment was full of things that now felt like accusations. Her mug on the counter, an unread book by the lamp. He said being home felt like standing in a room where someone had turned up the volume on silence. So he came out because the machine's clatter made the absence bearable and the dryer's warmth felt like a human heartbeat. He stayed for 90 minutes. We didn't have a big conversation. I swept, folded, refilled change machines, and every so often we'd trade a sentence. His voice flat, mine just listening. Once he thanked me for not asking the kind of questions he wasn't ready to answer. That was all. Mostly we sat near one another and let the laundromat do what it does. Make noise, spin things around, pretend everything will be okay if you keep it moving. Before that night, I treated people like scenery. Faces you passed on the sidewalk, obstacles if they slowed you down. After Arthur, I started seeing the littlest things differently. A person in line with tired eyes might be carrying a recent loss. The guy who honks at you could be on his last nerve for reasons you don't know. It doesn't make life easy, but it changed my default. I try to be softer now. Hold a door, let someone cut in, offer an extra quarter. It's been years. I don't work nights anymore, and Arthur's probably a name I'll never run into again. But sometimes at odd hours I picture someone sitting alone, watching a dryer spin, and I remember that quiet things can be the loudest kind of pain. That memory turned me from someone who barely noticed people into someone who at least tries to make the world a little less noisy for whoever's listening. This encounter beautifully illustrates how stepping outside of our own bubbles can transform random strangers into profound teachers of empathy. I was roped when I was 7. I don't go into the details much. What matters is the shape of the damage it left. A new, permanent map of the world drawn in sharp, suspicious lines. Before that, I trusted the small comforts. The neighbor who always waved, the teacher who gave out stickers, the way a summer afternoon felt safe because my parents were home. Afterward, those comforts felt like props in someone else's life. I learned, the hard way, that safety is fragile and often an illusion. The thing that hurt me came from a person who looked normal on the outside, which is the part that keeps echoing in my head. Normal faces can be a costume. For a long time, I walked around like I'd swallowed glass. I flinched at touches I'd used to enjoy. I couldn't sleep in the dark without a light on. I started measuring strangers by how harmless they appeared. If they smiled too easily, I watched their hands. If they were kind, I braced for the catch. My emotions were loud and jagged. Anger at being stolen from, shame for something that wasn't my fault, grief for the child self that got robbed of innocence. Trauma rewires you. It doesn't just add a scar. It rewrites the assumptions you used to lean on. Where other people saw neighbors and coworkers and baristas, I often saw potential threats or people carrying secret harms. It made me less naive, but also less free. Beauty stopped being purely beautiful. A sunset or a soft laugh could still move me, but it came with a spike of alert. What's under this? Who else's hand is behind this curtain? That's not to say everything turned black. There is a ridiculous amount of tenderness in the world if you let yourself notice it. Small, ordinary mercies that are real and sustaining. People who stayed, who listened, who didn't make it about them, who checked in with a text. That stuff is the opposite of the hurt. It rebuilt me in slow, bumpy increments. Therapy helped, friends helped, time helped, in the same way that a wound eventually toughens into skin. But the innocence is gone. The line between danger and comfort will always be harder for me to see than it used to be. I don't tell this for sympathy. I'm not asking anyone to walk on eggshells. I tell it because it's wholly important to remember this. The person next to you may be carrying a private darkness you'll never guess at. And because safety is not a universal birthright, lots of people live with the knowledge that the world can hurt them in ways others never imagine. If you can be a little gentler, say nothing more dramatic than, "Are you okay?" Or hold a hand a beat longer, It matters. It won't erase the past, but kindness is one of the few tools that actually chips away at that map of sharp lines, even if only a little. This reflection on trauma serves as a sobering reminder that safety is a luxury many people have to fight to believe in again. This is from the winter of 2019, when I was working nights at a tiny pizza place called Marco's on the edge of town. I was 26, scraping my way through shift work and bad takeout, and there was a guy who slept behind the dumpster out back most nights. His name was Darren, or that's what he told me the first time we actually spoke. Everyone at the shop had a nickname for him. Trash Man, the Junkie, the whole lot, because he'd sit on the cold concrete, needles and foil visible now and then, sometimes yelling, sometimes just staring. People avoided him. The manager would jerk his chin toward the back and say, "He's a problem." Customers crossed the alley faster when he was there. We all had the same easy contempt. Darren used to be the kind of presence that made you tidy your pockets and hurry your steps. He was loud enough to be noticed and chaotic enough to make the staff sigh. I admit I joined in on the eye-rolling. It's easy to feel superior from behind a counter, especially at 3 in the morning with the coffee gone cold and your feet numb. I'm not proud of it. One Sunday after a staff party the week of December 12th, I showed up hungover, hair plastered to my head, and stepped outside for a cigarette because the beer tasted like bad decisions and I needed to breathe. It was about 10:30 a.m., the alley still half asleep. Darren was there, hunched under his threadbare jacket, the back of his head leaning against the brick like he was a fixture. I thought about walking past. Instead, I flicked my lighter, offered him a smoke without thinking, and he accepted. We ended up sitting on the loading dock for an hour. I don't remember the topic so much as the tone. Low, raw, nobody pretending. He was funny in a rotgut kind of way, and then he was quiet, and then he said something that made me sit up. "People think I'm here because I want to be," he said. "But when you've been kicked by the world too many times, you stop checking what it says." He told me about a childhood house where yelling came before supper, about a foster system that shuffled him around like furniture, about a brief stretch as a mechanic where he could name every bolt on a '98 Ford. He had been clean for a while once, 2 years, until a back injury took that job and then the doctor wouldn't give him anything stronger than ibuprofen. He waited a week, then a month, then a year for treatment that never came. The pills were supposed to fix the pain, he said, and there was an ugly kind of resignation in his voice. They just taught me how to not feel anything at all. He told me about nights in prison and a girlfriend who left a note on the kitchen table with a forwarding address that was never used. He said his brother had died in a place where no one rings the bell. He had been latched to substances because they were the only thing that made the screaming stop, and because the system he'd relied on had failed him so many times that getting clean felt like asking a stranger for a kidney. At some point, I put out my cigarette. I felt stupid for being surprised. People always are. The whole night shifted for me, not because he asked for anything or apologized for existing, but because he was a whole person, messy and hurt and stubborn, and not the caricature we'd all slotted him into. He was someone who'd once been relied upon, someone who'd once paid rent on time and fixed neighbors' cars and had favorite songs. People don't always stay that version of themselves. Things happen. When I went back inside, the mood was different. I told no one what he'd said. It wasn't a sermon or a moral punchline. It was a quiet realignment. Over the next few weeks, I brought him coffee when the nights were sharp, a spare hoodie someone had donated, and once, when I had a free afternoon, I helped him make a phone call to a clinic. It wasn't much. He didn't become an inspirational before and after story. He still had bad days. There were times he vanished for a week and came back thinner, and times when he laughed at the dumbest jokes, like the world was still worth a cheap grin. What changed was the way I walked. I stopped assuming I knew someone's whole life from a single corner of it. The other staff noticed, I think. Maybe they just tolerated the extra coffee cups near the dumpster. The manager grumbled when I left early to help Darren with a bus ticket, but he stopped telling us to call the cops when Darren slept through the morning. Small shifts. A few months later, Darren moved into a shelter that had a slow, steady program. One that didn't promise miracles, just appointments and a caseworker who came when she said she would. I don't know everything that happened after. I still see him sometimes when I take the long way home from a late shift, a figure in the distance with a bag and a steady pace. Sometimes people change because someone asked a stupid human question and stayed to listen. I'm not saying everyone I meet will change or that a laugh and a cigarette can fix structural problems. I am saying that people are more complicated than the one-liners we tell about them. That afternoon in December taught me something obvious in a way that stuck. You can't know the private weather someone's been living through, so go gentle. If you can spare a light or 5 minutes or a call to a clinic, do it. You might only be moving a grain of sand, but sometimes that's enough to stop someone from getting buried. Darren's story is a vital wake-up call to look past the labels we give people and see the human beings struggling underneath. I was a sophomore writing for the campus paper, mostly layout and the captions nobody else wanted. I was small, awkward, and the same three guys from the debate team liked to make me their target between deadlines. They'd mock my voice during meetings, move my notes, laugh when I tried to hand in copy. It wasn't violent stuff, just the steady, grinding kind of mean that wears you down. There was an assistant editor named Ben who always had my back in the office. He'd sit with me when I was messing up a page, point out a headline trick, or tell one of the jerks to stop talking over me. He didn't make a scene, didn't make me a show horse, just a few quiet lines like, "You can ignore them, you do good work," or, "That's not on you." When you're getting pushed around, someone noticing and saying a simple thing like that feels massive. I started staying later on layout nights because he'd answer dumb questions and actually explain things instead of rolling his eyes. A month later, on a slow Friday, my roommate dragged me to a trivia night at a bar across campus. I wasn't really in the mood, but figured the free pizza was worth it. Halfway through the second round, I looked up and saw Ben with a pack of upperclassmen, the same debate bros, crowded around an old Pac-Man machine near the jukebox. He had a beer in one hand and a stupid grin on his face. I smiled because it was silly to see him there outside the newsroom. I dropped a quarter in and joined a quick round. I'm horrible at those games, so I expected to suck and laugh it off. What I didn't expect was the way Ben and his crew started talking to me. It wasn't the casual ribbing we get in the office. It was loud and pointed. "Don't waste your time, newbie," one guy said. "You always look so try-hard," Ben chimed in like he was conducting a chorus. Every missed pellet, every clumsy turn got a louder, meaner jab. When I lost, Ben high-fived the others and basically turned his back on me. He didn't look apologetic. He looked entertained. I left the bar with my face hot and stupid, blinking against the fluorescent of a 24-hour diner. My roommate noticed I'd gone quiet and asked what happened. I mumbled something about losing. She stopped, looked at me, and said flatly, "That guy's a climber? He's sweet at the paper because he wants glowing things to put on his grad school apps. Out here, he's one of the guys he's trying to be." I wanted to punch her for making me feel naive. But she was right. It made this weird click in my head, like a part of the map I'd been using to navigate people had been redrawn. After that, I kept it cordial at work and stopped sticking around after layout nights. I didn't accuse him or make a scene. I just folded inward, quieter, and stopped asking for help unless it was necessary. When he gave me the usual good job in the editor's meetings, it sounded hollow to me. When he left the paper that summer for an internship that led to a paid position elsewhere, I felt neither relief nor joy, just an odd emptiness. I don't tell this story to drag Ben. Maybe he had complex reasons. Maybe he really did like helping people at the paper. People are messy. What it taught me was smaller and sharper. Kindness that happens only when someone's career benefits from it is different from kindness that holds up outside the span of convenience. It's not necessarily evil, but it is conditional, and conditional kindness is still conditional. Now I watch for the quieter things. The classmates who hand you notes without an audience. The friend who doesn't make a joke at your expense in front of others. They're the people I trust first. I'm also less eager to trust flattery coming from someone who always seems to have a motive. It's a small armor, not a wall. The weird part is how small the moment that changed me was, a coin and a video game at a bar. Maybe if Ben had been mean in the newsroom, I'd have felt betrayed in a different way. But the truth is, betrayal doesn't need fireworks. It just needs one place where the lights go off and you see the person as they are. Learning that someone's kindness is purely transactional is a harsh but effective way to learn the difference between true allies and social climbers. I've never been a religious person. I'm the type of guy who needs data and receipts before I believe in anything supernatural. I work in logistics, so my brain is basically wired for spreadsheets and hard facts. But something happened a few years ago that I still can't explain to my friends without sounding like I've lost my mind. To give you some context, I had an older brother named Elias. We were close growing up, but by our late 20s, things went south. It was a slow-motion car crash of a relationship. Bad debts, a lot of pride, and a final explosive argument over our grandmother's estate in 2019. After that, we went totally no contact. He moved to a different province, changed his number, and as far as I was concerned, he didn't exist anymore. I was angry, and I figured we'd eventually settle it in 10 or 20 years when we were old and tired. Fast forward to November 12th, 2022. I was staying at a hotel for a work conference. I fell into a deep, heavy sleep around midnight. At exactly 3:14 a.m., I know the time because I checked my phone the second I jumped out of bed. I had the most vivid dream of my life. In the dream, I was sitting in my Nana's old kitchen. The lighting was weird, that hazy afternoon sun that feels like it's from a memory. My Nana, who passed away in 2015, was standing by the stove. She didn't look old or sick. She just looked tired. She didn't even say hello. She just looked at me over her shoulder and said, "Leo, your brother has been gone for weeks. You need to check the registry." I woke up with my heart hammering against my ribs. It wasn't like a normal nightmare where the fear fades. It was an urgent, cold realization. I tried to go back to sleep, telling myself it was just estrangement guilt or a bad burrito, but I couldn't shake the feeling. My hands were actually shaking. In my country, we have a public transparency portal managed by the Civil Registry. It's mostly used for checking tax liens or verifying IDs for business contracts, but it also lists the civil status of every citizen: single, married, divorced, or deceased. I grabbed my tablet from the nightstand. I still remembered Elias's national ID number from when we were filing the probate papers years prior. I typed it into the search bar, my breath hitching in my throat. I clicked search. I just stared at the screen. The blue light was blinding in the dark hotel room. He had been dead for nearly 3 months. I spent the next 4 hours spiraling. I eventually tracked down a distant cousin on social media who told me the rest. Elias had been involved in a hit and run while walking home from work in a city 300 miles away. He had moved there under a bit of a cloud and hadn't kept in touch with anyone. Because he'd cleared out his emergency contact info and didn't have a spouse, the state had buried him in a quiet plot after nobody claimed the body within 30 days. If I hadn't had that dream, I would have gone years, maybe decades, thinking he was still out there somewhere, being stubborn and avoiding my calls. I would have eventually reached out to bury the hatchet only to find out the man had been dust for half my life. The logical part of my brain tries to debunk it. Maybe I saw a news clipping subconsciously. Maybe I heard a rumor. But I hadn't spoken to a soul from that town. There is no logical way for my brain to have known the specific status of a government database at 3 a.m. It changed how I look at everything. We like to think we're these isolated units moving through a cold, mechanical world. We think we're just meat and bone. But after that night, I'm convinced there's some kind of background noise to the universe. A tether that connects people, especially family, that doesn't care about no-contact orders or geography. I'm still not religious. I don't go to church, and I don't read horoscopes. But I know for a fact that my Nana, or whatever energy she left behind, pinged my server that night because I needed to know. We're part of something much bigger and much weirder than a spreadsheet can explain. This experience suggests that there are invisible threads connecting us to those we love, even when logic says the line has been cut. I used to have this really naive worldview where I assumed everyone operated on the same basic moral frequency. I grew up believing that if someone was angry with you, it was because of a specific friction point, a misunderstanding, a slight, or some forgotten debt. I genuinely thought that mean people were just regular people who were having a bad day or felt slighted. If I could just figure out what I did to upset them, I could fix it. That mindset honestly made me a bit of a doormat, but it also made the world feel predictable and safe. That changed about 5 years ago, back in the spring of 2021. I started getting these weirdly aggressive messages on Discord and occasionally on my personal phone. The guy's name, or at least the name he used, was Julian. I had no idea who he was. We were in a few overlapping hobbyist groups for PC building and vintage tech, but I'd never had a direct conversation with him. Out of nowhere, he started messaging me these incredibly detailed, hateful rants. He'd call me a pretentious hack, tell me my builds were trash for people with more money than brains, and eventually, it got personal. He'd comment on my appearance from my profile photos, telling me I looked like the kind of guy who smells like old milk. It was constant. Every few days, a new notification would pop up with some fresh insult. For months, I was obsessed with figuring out what I'd done to him. I spent hours scrolling back through months of group chat logs. Did I ignore one of his questions? Did I outbid him on a part on eBay and he somehow tracked me down? I actually sent him a long, incredibly cringe-inducing message at one point. I wrote something like, "Hey man, I'm clearly rubbing you the wrong way and I'm not sure why. If I did something to offend you, I'd like to apologize and clear the air." He didn't reply to that. Instead, 2 days later, he just sent a photo of a garbage can with the caption, "Found your house." I stayed in that cycle of anxiety for probably 6 months. It sounds stupid looking back, but I felt this weird guilt, like I was the villain in a story I didn't know I was in. I felt like I owed him a resolution because, in my head, nobody acts like that without a reason. Then, in November of that year, there was a local tech swap meet in the city. I was at a table looking at some old mechanical keyboards when a guy tapped me on the shoulder. He looked totally normal. Standard hoodie, jeans, glasses. He smiled and said, "Hey, you're the guy from the Discord group, right? I recognize your avatar." I froze. I recognized his face from his own profile. It was Julian. I braced myself for a confrontation or at least some weird, snide comment. I thought this was the moment where he'd finally tell me what his problem was. Instead, he just started talking to me like we were old friends. He asked me what I thought of the new GPU benchmarks and if I'd seen any good deals at the swap. He was perfectly pleasant, even charming in a geeky way. There wasn't a hint of malice in his voice. He didn't mention the messages once. After about 5 minutes of small talk, he just waved and said, "Catch you later, man," and walked off to look at some cables. I just stood there, completely floored. I checked my phone 10 minutes later, and there was a new message from him. "That shirt looks even worse in person. You look like a thumb." That was the aha moment for me, and it was honestly kind of devastating. I realized there was no reason. I hadn't slighted him. I hadn't outbid him. He didn't even actually hate me. He just liked the friction. He liked the power of being a jerk and seeing if he could get a rise out of someone. The reason was just that he was bored and found it entertaining to be a villain in someone else's head. It completely broke my habit of trying to solve people. I realized that for some people, the cruelty is the point. They aren't acting out of a sense of justice or retaliation. They're just mean because they can be. Now, when I encounter someone like that, I don't ask myself what I did wrong. I just realize they've got a void they're trying to fill with someone else's stress, and I stop giving them the satisfaction. It was a harsh lesson, but it saved me a lot of future headaches. Accepting that some people are simply mean for sport is the most effective way to stop wasting energy on people who don't deserve your concern. Thanks for watching. Like this video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on real human stories.